Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Wenn, mein Stündlein, vorhanden ist, which translates to if the hour of my death is at hand. We've looked at this text recently. I'm interested to see if there's anything in common between the harmonizations that we've looked at recently. But this is a denser chorale in terms of all the harmonic content, so we're just going to hop right into the analysis. So there are 3 sharps in the key signature. We start on A major, we end on A major. I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is A major. We also have some passing tones in the alto and the bass. Before we get A major again, C sharp, A, E, and E, which I think is a gateway chord, common chord, that takes us to F sharp minor, so it becomes our 3 chord in F sharp minor. We then get D sharp, F sharp, B, and F sharp, which is our 4 chord in first inversion with the 7th, so 4, 6, 5. You could also analyze this as G sharp minor 7 flat 5 over D sharp, which would be 2, 4, 3. However, the reason why I feel like this is a 4, 6, 5 chord, not a 2, 4, 3 chord, has to do with the fact that this progression pops up a ton in Bach's writing, especially when we see melodic minor, and I'm inclined to believe that 4, 6, 5 is that chord, even though we have counterpoint that creates a situation. I was trying to say situation and scenario at the same time, a situation where there's multiple chords that could be interpreted. But after 4, 6, 5, we usually get 5, 6, 5, and that's what we get here. E sharp, C sharp, B, and G sharp, which is C sharp 7 over E sharp 5, 6, 5. And then we get F sharp minor, F sharp, C sharp, A, and A. Tonic triad, root position. Then we head right back to the key of A major again. This was a mid-phrase modulation. And then F sharp minor turns into our 6th chord before we get G sharp, B, E, and B, which is our 5 chord, E major over G sharp. And then we get A major, but what's interesting about this A major chord is that we have a passing G natural. So I do think that this is functioning as our tonic in the key of A major, but I also think like it's functioning as our 5 chord in the key of D major, and this is an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of D major. If you've watched my videos in the past, you know that I've been calling these subdominant cadences. Something about moving very quickly to the key of the subdominant right at the end of the phrase is it's a particular sound that is kind of unique to Bach's writing in the chorales, and they've been popping up kind of frequently recently. I know it's just a coincidence that it happens to be at this point in my journey to analyze all of the chorales, but I think it's kind of interesting that when Bach moves towards the subdominant at the end of the phrase, it has a different impact than moving towards the dominant. I just think that's an interesting thing that happens. Sometimes we see subdominant cadences that don't have the flatted 7th here, but the fact that we do have the flatted 7th is definitely more of a tell that we've moved keys where it's not as apparent in other circumstances. So our final chord is D major, D, F sharp, D, and A, which is functioning as our tonic here. It's also functioning as our 4 chord in the key of A major. So moving on to the next phrase, I think we end with a plagal cadence in the key of F sharp minor, but it's a bit ambiguous. We'll see how the cadence operates when we get there. But we do start in the key of A major. We start with an A major chord, A, E, and C sharp. Passing tones in the outer voices before we get C sharp, G sharp, E, and E. Kind of an interesting chord progression, 1, 2, 3, especially in root position like this, but I really do feel like this G sharp is sort of, it's almost operating like an accented non-chord tone. Maybe this is like an implied tonic triad in first inversion, which is typically what we would expect Bach to write, especially at the beginning of a phrase. But regardless, passing 7th in the bass, passing tone here in the tenor before we get G sharp, B, E, and E, which is our 5 chord in first inversion. This A is an accented non-chord tone. And then we get our tonic, A, E, and C sharp. A major, passing tones in the tenor and the melody before we get A sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and E, which is F sharp 7 over A sharp. That is 5, 6, 5 of 2, because F sharp is the dominant of B, and B is our 2 or our supertonic. Then we get B, B, F sharp, and D. And once we see E sharp here, I think we know that we've modulated, or we're in the process of modulating. So B is now our 4 chord. We then have B, C sharp, E sharp, and D, which is kind of like a, it's actually not kind of like anything, it is a, we have C sharp, oh no, apologies, that's what I meant by kinda. I misread this, C sharp as a G in hindsight. I don't know why I saw that, but yeah, C sharp is still a passing tone. It's almost like we have a passing like a C sharp 7 chord here, but this D makes it kind of complicated to analyze. Wouldn't really give us an analyzable chord as a result. But we have another B minor chord here, B, D, F sharp, and B, so we don't need to reanalyze. But this passing chord that we have here is E natural, not E sharp. So we have E natural and G sharp here with B and D. That gives us E7 over B, which is like a subtonic 7th chord in, second inversion, so that's 7, 4, 3. And then we go to F minor, or sorry, F sharp minor, F sharp, A, and C sharp. So the reason why I think this is a plagal cadence is because, for starters, this chord is happening in passing. That's not really the biggest reason why. The biggest reason why is the fact that this is a stable chord. There's no leading tone. If this were a diminished chord, this would easily be a in like an authentic cadence, but I really feel like the big picture here is 4 going to 1. So maybe this is an imperfect authentic cadence, who knows. I think it's a plagal cadence though, just because it's like stable chord, tonic, and I really think that's the extent of how the phrase is operating, or more specifically how the cadence is operating. But let me know what you think if you have an alternative opinion. Next phrase ends in an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of F sharp minor, but we are going to start the phrase off in the key of A major. So I do think here, sorry, my handwriting is going to get kind of cramped here because it's just the nature of the chorale and how jam-packed it is. So F sharp minor is also our 6 in the key of A major. We get A major afterwards, A, E, A, and C sharp. And then we get this really interesting chain here. I think this might be my most favorite, my favorite part, my most favoritist. My favorite part of this chorale is this chord progression here. We have A, F sharp, B, and D. That's a B minor 7 over A, which is 2, 4, 2. And we would expect that to go to our 5 chord in first inversion, which we get G sharp, E, B, and D. It's 5, 6, 5, E7 over G sharp. And then we would expect that probably to go to our tonic triad, which it does. But what's really interesting about this tonic triad is we get G sharp, E, A, and C sharp, which would make this a tonic 7 chord in third inversion. Now, you could look at what's happening in the bass here as a double suspension, but what's really interesting about this is that it resolves the way that we would expect if this were a tonic 7th chord, which I'm pretty convinced that it is. We have F sharp and D in the lower voices as well, and the syncopated rhythm going on. It's hard for me to read, but anywho, F sharp, D, A, and C is 4, 6, 5. This should be 5, 6, 5. Sorry, I was talking about 5, 6, but this is also 5, 6, 5. So we have 2, 4, 2, 5, 6, 5, 1, 4, 2, 4, 6, 5. And I think that that's super interesting that the cycle of falling fifths and the proper 4-2 resolutions are happening with a tonic 7th chord. I think that's really neat. But afterwards we get F sharp, D, G sharp, and B, which is G sharp minor 7 flat 5 over F sharp, which is 7, 4, 2, another 7, 4, 2 chord here. So we have a big cycle of falling fifths progression happening here. And I do think this is the point in which we modulate to the key of F sharp minor. This is now our 2, 4, 2 chord. It's our supertonic now rather than our leading tone chord, based on the way that it resolves. I think this is a bit of a modulation zone as well. Any of these chords could have been a point where we marked the modulation, but it didn't really start feeling like a modulation was occurring until this point for me anyways. So this E sharp and this C sharp here, we're going to use an arrow and kind of angle it to keep it so that we can kind of keep the main line going on and reference where it's happening with the arrow. E sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and B is C sharp 7 over E sharp, which is 5, 6, 5, which is where 2, 4, 2 wants to resolve anyways, which is really nifty. So all of these chords resolve the way that we would expect them to, and they're all 4/2 chords as well on the strong beats, or the numbered beats rather. Then we would expect this to go to our tonic, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. Root position, F sharp minor chord. We then have a D, which is a non-chord tone, B, which is a non-chord tone, and B, which is also a non-chord tone, and that gives us B minor over D, which is 4/6, and then we get F sharp minor over A, F sharp, and C sharp, tonic triad. Root position, or sorry, first inversion because it's over A like I just said, passing tone in the bass. Then we get C sharp, G sharp, E sharp, and C sharp. 4/3 suspensions are really common over root position dominant triads. It's our 5 chord. And then we get our tonic, F sharp, C sharp, and A. Root position. Next phrase is straightforward. It's in the key of A major. Also ends in an imperfect authentic cadence. We start off with F sharp minor, F sharp, A, F sharp, and C, which is also our tonic triad in the key of F sharp minor. So we don't need to reanalyze in the key of F sharp minor, but it's our 6th chord in the key of A, passing tone here in the melody. And then we get G sharp, B, E, and E. E major over G sharp, that's our 5 chord. We have some non-chord tones happening on the end of the beat. We have F sharp, A, F sharp, and E, which is kind of like a passing 6/7 chord without the 5th, but because it's happening off of the harmonic rhythm, I don't really tend to analyze chords that aren't completely spelled, but it's kind of there in passing. It's one of the benefits of these videos because I can talk about it, but just because it doesn't make it onto the page doesn't mean it's not worth talking about. But on the next beat, we get E major in root position, E, B, G sharp, and E. So we don't need to reiterate the Roman numeral, but we can change the figured bass. E is also a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it. And then we get our tonic triad, A major, A, E, A, and C sharp. Passing tone here in the melody before we get C sharp, E, A, and E. That's just taking our tonic triad and inverting it. Again, we don't have to reiterate the Roman numeral. Next chord we have B, F sharp, A, and D, which is our 2 chord with a 7th in root position. G sharp's a little passing tone, F sharp is a chord tone, D is a chord tone, and then we get E, B, G sharp, and D, which is our 5 chord with a 7th in root position. E is a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it, and then we get A major, A, E, A, and C sharp, tonic triad in root position. Next phrase, we get another imperfect authentic cadence with a subdominant sort of feel where we move to the key of D major right at the end, or we cadence on the 4. It's difficult to say because it's interesting if we compare the subdominant and the dominant to one another and how Bach ends phrases in the key or referring to the key of the dominant, it sometimes feels like we haven't moved keys, but when we hear that passing G natural, in this case it really does feel like we've moved to the key of D major more so than moving to the key of E major, and I really wonder why that's the case. But yeah, we encounter it with quite a bit of frequency in Bach, especially in the most recent chorales that we've been looking at. Apologies for just smacking my microphone like a couple seconds ago. We start the phrase off with A major, so we don't need to reanalyze, but on the next beat we have kind of an interesting chord progression. We have A, F sharp, A, and D, which is D major over A, which is 4/6/4, kind of an interesting chord. And in passing, we have B, which is a non-chord tone, in G sharp, which gives us kind of the feel of a passing 7 chord, but we don't get it in its entirety. This A is sort of functioning like a pedal tone underneath it. But yeah, 4 going to 7, which would then go to 1. But I'm not going to analyze the chord because it's not entirely intact. So on the next beat, we have A, C sharp, A, and C sharp, which is our tonic triad in root position. After this passing tone in the tenor, we have A, G sharp, E, and B. This A is probably a lower suspension, maybe like a 9/10 suspension under the melody. This would be our 5 chord in first inversion, and C sharp would turn into the tone on the next beat, which leaves us with our tonic triad in first inversion: C sharp, E, E, and A. We have 4 voices moving off of the harmonic rhythm on the next beat, where we have B, D, B, and it's a bit of a toss-up here, but I think this F sharp is the non-chord tone. Well, I guess technically G sharp would also be a non-chord tone, but I think what's being referred to here is a G sharp diminished chord over B, which would be 7/6, and would make sense in between 2 tonic triads. So yeah, after this passing chord, we have A, E, A, and C sharp, just taking our tonic triad and putting it in root position. And we'll just go ahead and say that this is where the modulation occurs to the key of D major 2, because we have G natural on the harmonic rhythm for the next beat anyways. So all that's really happening on the next beat is A7. So we could just change the figure bass, right? A, E, G natural, and C sharp. B is a passing tone, C sharp's a chord tone, and doesn't leave us with a complete triad anyways, so it's not really important to analyze. But then we cadence on D major, of course. D, D, F sharp, and a tonic triad, root position. Next phrase, the longest, oh sorry, not quite yet, I missed that fermata there. Next phrase takes us to the key of E major, and if I'm not mistaken, this is our first perfect authentic cadence in the chorale, and it's in the key of the overall dominant, assuming that we're in the key of A major here. We start the phrase off in the key, or even before starting the phrase off in the key of A major. D major, I believe, is our 4 chord, just like the first phrase. We go to G sharp, B, E, and B. It's our 5 chord in first inversion, E major over G sharp. And then we get A major, A, E, and C sharp, tonic triad, root position. E is a chord tone, G sharp is not a chord tone, G sharp is also not a chord tone, and C sharp is a chord tone, which leaves us kind of with our 3 chord in first inversion here, 3/6. Kind of an interesting chord, but it does make sense root-wise because we go to F sharp minor on the next beat, A, F sharp, and C sharp, 6/6. C sharp is a chord tone, E is a passing 7th, and then we get G sharp, B, D sharp, and F sharp, and come to think of it, this F sharp chord over A is probably our gateway to the key of E major. It actually turns into our 2/6 chord because this D sharp is our leading tone to E, and from that point forward we get a lot of D sharp. So we'll just say that this, what would it be? B minor 7 over A. So yeah, that A actually is a chord tone, and this would be a 5/4/2 chord. B7 over A. And this is kind of an interesting thing here, where we've seen this resolution in the past, but it kind of looks like an irregular 4/2 resolution. The root is the same, but the bass doesn't immediately resolve the way we would expect. So G sharp is in the bass here, but we don't get a tonic triad until the next beat. So the bass is either ahead or lagging behind, depending on how you look at it, because it isn't until the next beat that we get E major, E, B, E, and G sharp, where this F sharp is an accented non-chord tone. So it looks like we have a 4/2 chord going to a root position tonic triad, but really it's sort of like a 2-part first inversion triad, because the bass resolves down by step, but then the rest of the harmony follows a half beat later with the rest of the context. So it's not an irregular resolution, it's just a different type of resolution, but it looks like one. Alright, we're working towards the cadence now. We get kind of an interesting cadence as well. We have D sharp, B, F sharp, and A. It's B7 over D sharp, which is 5/6/5. E, E, and G sharp are all non-chord tones, which gives us a tonic triad on the end of the beat, E major. Then we get A, C sharp, E, and F sharp, which is F sharp minor 7 over A. We know that Bach loves 2/6/5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. And that takes us to our 5 chord, which we would expect after a 2/6/5 chord. B, F sharp is a chord tone, D sharp, and F sharp. B major in root position. And then we get our tonic triad, E major, E, G sharp, E, and E. 3 roots and 1/3. as our spelling. Last phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A, and I think we start the phrase off in the key of A because of this passing D natural here. Even though E is also our tonic in the key of E major, it's also our 5 chord in the key of A major. C sharp is a non-chord, sorry, A is a non-chord tone, B is a chord tone. We then get C sharp, E, E, and A, which is our tonic triad in first inversion, passing tone in the bass, and then we get another accented non-chord tone here with G sharp, B, E, and B. It's our 5 chord in first inversion, and then we get A, E, and C sharp, tonic triad root position, passing tone in the bass, little neighbor tone here as well. C sharp is a chord tone, E is a chord tone. We do get a brief A major chord in first inversion here, so I will mark it. And then we get D, A, F sharp, and C sharp, which is a D major 7 in root position. We also have A, which is a chord tone, C sharp, which is a chord tone, but we also have B and G sharp here, which are non-chord tones, and very, very briefly we get G sharp minor 7 flat 5 over D, which is 7, 4, 3. 4 typically wants to go to 7, but we don't quite get a resolution until really our cadence. So I don't really know exactly how much of a role this chord is playing in the progression. My intuition tells me it's not very great because it's literally just for the length of a 16th note. And also going to the next beat, we have D, B, F sharp, and D. And while I do think 2 could be a valid analysis here, 2-6 more specifically, B minor over D, I think this F sharp is an accented non-chord tone, and really what's happening here is we're getting a 7-6 chord, which is kind of just taking the and of the previous beat, and how would we make this? It would be first inversion, and without the, yeah, it would be 8-6-3. It's just taking the 7 chord from the end of the beat and sort of prolonging the idea before we get our next beat, F sharp, C sharp, A, and C sharp, which is our 6 chord in root position now that we're in the key of A major. Yeah, this is a bit of a toss-up here what exactly is happening, because 2 and 7 are very similar to each other in pitch content, just like all chords that are a third apart. I think that really the big picture here is that 4 is going to 7, and then we get a deceptive progression, but we do get some allusion to 7 happening here as well. Moving on to the next beat, after this passing 7th and these passing tones here, one of them also being a passing 7th, we have D, F sharp, A, and B. It's 2-6-5. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. G sharp's a non-chord tone here, F sharp's a chord tone, D is a chord tone, and B is a chord tone. So very briefly, the chord is in root position here as well, which is not super common, but it does happen from time to time. And then we get E major, which is our 5 chord, which is what we would expect after a 2 chord in a cadential context, usually speaking. E, B, G sharp, and B. E is a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it. And then we get our tonic triad, A, C sharp, E, and A, which is typically how we expect our chorales to end, or Bach's chorales to end. That is, this chorale had a lot going on, very dense, contrapuntally speaking, kind of difficult for me to read, so it took me a while to analyze this one, but all in all, harmony was relatively straightforward, lots of modulations, especially in the middle of the phrase, but all the harmony was more or less expected. I think the big takeaways here are the mid-phrase modulations, which I just talked about, the fact that Bach typically will modulate to a phrase and stick in that phrase until the end, or stick in that key, until the end of the phrase, but we see Bach flipping between keys sometimes upwards of 3 times in the same phrase. And the other takeaway is the tonic 7th that kind of sneaks in right here, which is super fascinating because it resolves the way that we would expect, and it's a really cool gesture. But other than that, I think the harmony is relatively typical of Bach, and despite it being very dense, everything more or less operates the way that we would expect. So I think I'm going to cap the video off on those thoughts. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video if you enjoyed the content as well. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.